Wilbur played with that kite, he got excited because it actually moved like he thought a turkey vulture should. Now, him and Orville realized if they were ever going to continue doing these experiments, they need to go find a laboratory somewhere. The Wright brothers believed this laboratory needed 3 things. Anybody want to guess what the first thing they were looking for was? Wind. You can feel just a little bit of it. That's why it's so hot right this second, because you can't feel much. It's a little bit of wind. So Wilbur and Orville researched the windiest spots in the United States. Got a list of just about 100 cities. The first 3 cities on that list were called Chicago, Buffalo, and Cleveland. There was something wrong with those 3 cities. There was no sand or privacy. The Wright brothers wanted sand because what goes up comes down very hard. And then they wanted the privacy because of newspapers. They were afraid that all these papers would chase them and take their pictures, put them on the front page of papers, call them fools. Anybody out here, I'll give you one guess. Anybody know what the 6th windiest spot in the United States was called on that list?
Outer Banks.
Hopefully you good folks understand where you're standing, right? Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. I'll be happy if you know you're in North Carolina. Kitty Hawk was the 6th windiest spot in the United States. The Wright brothers never heard of Kitty Hawk. And no, your 4th grade teacher did not lie to you. Wilbur and Orville Wright flew at Kitty Hawk. This is Kitty Hawk. It's not Kill Devil Hill. This is Kitty Hawk, the history. It was renamed Kill Devil Hills in 1953. This hill has had the name Big Kill Devil Hill of Kitty Hawk since the 1600s, since Blackbeard's days. But this is Kitty Hawk to Wilbur and Orville. They didn't know what was down here. There is more people looking at me right this second than lived in all of Kitty Hawk when the Wright brothers showed up. So they wrote a letter trying to figure out what was here. The man who got that letter, his name is Mr. William Tate. Mr. Tate was Kitty Hawk's county commissioner, dog catcher, ran the post office, the telegraph station, and everything else you needed down here in Kitty Hawk. He kindly wrote back to Wilbur, and to sum up his letter, he said, "You boys might want to come on down this way. The only thing you will find in Kitty Hawk is wind, sand, wide open spaces, southern hospitality, and not a single thing else." Sounded perfect to Wilbur and Orville. It takes you just about 12 hours to drive here from Dayton, Ohio today. It took Wilbur and Orville Wright 7 days to make that same trip. 2 trains, 2 boats, and you had to walk almost 5 miles, dragging all of your equipment with you through sand. When they got right here, they looked at everything you see in front of you, and they wrote a letter back to their father to describe the landscape of Kitty Hawk. They called it the Sahara Desert. There's something wrong, though, with what I just told you. What's the only thing you see in front of you?
Grass.
Nothing but grass and trees. Most people don't understand or realize what it should look like where you were standing still today. This is what it looked like when Wilbur and Orville Wright showed up at Kitty Hawk. Wilbur took this picture off that hill right there looking at these 2 buildings. These are those 2 buildings right there in this picture. There should not be a single blade of grass or a single tree anywhere in Kitty Hawk. This photo is what it looked like for thousands of years. Everything you see in front of you, it's only looked like this since the 1940s. We created all of this so you guys could have a vacation. We're on Barrier Island. And Barrier Islands are not supposed to have people living on them like this. We're supposed to get hit hard by storms and rain and hurricanes and tropical events all the time. We should flood almost every day. And once we flood, all you get is this landscape, salt and sand. In the 1930s, have you ever heard of the Civilian Conservation Corps? Yeah. They built the sand dunes down here to protect and preserve this place for vacations and tourism. If you've been to the ocean, you had to park your car and walk over a pile of sand to get to a tiny beach. That's not natural. That pile of sand is 200 miles long, and it protects this place from flooding every single day. Once we did that, the grass took over. And then if you look at all these trees right here, you will see it in the strand we cut through at the airport. Every one of those trees is exactly the same height. If you climb to the top of the hill, you will really notice it. Every tree is basically the same height, because we planted all of them in the same time. So to truly appreciate why the Wrights chose Kitty Hawk, you got to imagine it looks like this still today. So they came all the way down here to fly a kite. The Wright brothers knew if this doesn't fly like a kite at first, it'll never fly like an airplane. They were smart enough to think like that. Nobody else thought like that. But the more they flew this giant kite around the dunes of Kitty Hawk, the more they wanted to climb into it somehow. But they were both just a little too afraid to do it. So now we got some kids out here. Is anybody between 8 and 12 years old? Put your hand up as tall as you can right this second. There's There's always a couple of scared-looking faces. Everybody clap and cheer and scream as loud as you can for those three little hands. The reason we always do that, because in this exact spot, in 1900, Wilbur and Orville Wright threw a 10-year-old boy off that hill to see what would happen first. These guys are geniuses. And if you're a genius, you're not taking the first ride. Somebody smaller is taking that first step. His name was Tommy Tate. Tom's uncle was the man who invited the Wrights to Kitty Hawk. Tom's father will assist them jumping off that hill for the next 3 years, and his aunt even gave Wilbur and Orville her sewing machine, reluctantly, to put all the material to the wings. We even have Addie's sewing machine. We'll stick it back in the visitor center when we open back up. So Tom, of course, would hang around all the time. He would constantly bug Wilbur and Orville. He was the greatest fisherman in the Outer Banks, if you ask Tom, but he never had a fish. So one day, when Tom finally strolled into camp, dragging this big drumfish right behind him, Wilbur and Orville were so impressed they snapped this photo real quick. If you look right behind Tom, you see something unique. You see a little glider in the sand. This is one of 2 photos that exist that show Wilbur and Orville Wright's very first glider. Right after they took this picture, they looked at his dad and said, "Would you mind if we stick Tom inside that thing and throw him off the hill to see what would happen?" If you're a father, you know exactly what the answer was. Yes, please, give it a try. And that afternoon, this little boy right here, the son of a poor fisherman in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, that day, Tommy Tate became the first human being to ever fly in a Wright brother invention. What little Tom did was open up a door, because Wilbur climbed into it that same day, and he stayed in the sky for a total of 2 minutes that entire summer. Wilbur will not let Orville fly until 1902 out of fear for his baby brother's life. So the Wright brothers went home, made as much money as they could that winter, excitedly returned to Kitty Hawk in 1901. When they came back to Kitty Hawk in 1901, they had the largest glider in human history. And all they did was fail and crash the entire summer. They forgot about that thing as kids. Bigger doesn't mean better. When Wilbur and Orville left Kitty Hawk at the end of 1901, they looked at each other and were convinced that it'd be at least 1,000 years, if ever, that a human being would fly one day. They quit for about 3 weeks until their sister stepped in. She was the glue of the family. She encouraged them to keep going. One of their mentors in D.C. pushed them a little farther as well. Wilbur and Orville got this idea that would change history. All they did was build a box about this big. Nobody ever thought of pushing wind through a box and putting little wings inside of it to see what would happen. These guys used a homemade wind tunnel. They took all the broken metal they could find, made about 200 little wings about this big, stuck them in that homemade wind tunnel and attached them to a balance and a scale, and just watched how wind moved over different shapes and sizes. What happened in that month period was 2 guys who dropped out of high school with no training at all in math, physics, or engineering on that homemade wooden box discovered the math solution to build a wing that is 0.1% off of what NASA still uses today. Build a wing. The world had never seen anything quite like it. We simply call it the 1902 glider. Wilbur and Orville returned to Kitty Hawk in 1902, and they drug this glider to the top of that hill and threw themselves off it 1,000 times in September of 1902. Folks, if you think it's hot out here today, it's barely 80. When Wilbur and Orville took this glider to the top of that hill, it was at least 100 degrees every single day. And every one of those trips, they did not have on shorts and sandals and jeans. They had on wool pants, wool socks, polished shoes, leather vests, wool hats, long sleeve shirts, starched collars, and ties. You guys aren't crazy. That's why you're not dressed like that today. But their father, the bishop, always told them, it doesn't matter if we go to church or run businesses or jump off of hills. We are gentlemen, and we always have on ties. That little green hill right there is where we learned how to fly. I would love to show you in the visitor center on our multi-million-dollar replica of what I'm about to talk about. So you'll have to come here next September to see that. But the next best thing I got for you is your fingers out here in the field. So everybody put one finger up like this. This is a flying machine. You take your hand and balance it. Or this is the sky, this is a flying machine. The first thing Wilbur and Orville Wright discovered for control is this motion going sideways we call roll. It's that empty box I twisted. They called it wing warping. We use something called an aileron today. It's a turkey vulture. The second motion is called pitch. If you've ever been bored driving down the highway, stick your hand out a car window, and by magic your hand starts going like this, you discovered pitch. If you don't believe me, be one of the 600,000 people I watch leave this park every year with your hands out your car window. I'm telling you the truth. So they got roll, they got pitch, and they got a big problem. Every time this wing dropped, it would lose all the lift and spin out of the sky. They couldn't figure out how to solve that until Orville drank a whole pot of coffee one night. Couldn't sleep at all that evening, staring at the ceiling in this building, and then he starts thinking about how boats work. You ever been on a boat before, and the water starts pushing your boat to the left, and you want it to go to the right? You use a rudder to push it back the way you want it to go. So he fought with Wilbur the next day and convinced him when we roll, we also need a rudder to help push the flying machine to the side. Once Wilbur finally agreed and they stuck it on there that day, they got the missing piece we call yaw. I know we're down here in the South. I'm from Montana, so I didn't say y'all at all. I said yaw, Y-A-W. When you put it all together, roll, pitch, and yaw is the control mechanism for all missiles, jets, airplanes, helicopters, satellites, space shuttles. Anything that ever left the planet, walked on the moon, or Voyager's still going through the galaxy today. And the Wright brothers were just amazed that secret was sitting right there since the beginning of time, waiting for them of all people. Now that they've figured out how to stay in the sky, we better figure out how to go up there. The Wright brothers don't know how to build engines, so they wrote a letter to all the automobile makers around the world and said, could somebody please build us an 8-horsepower engine that only weighs about 200 pounds? And every engine maker in the world threw that letter in the garbage because it was impossible. You couldn't do that. Except Wilbur and Orville Wright didn't know any better because they never built an engine before. So the Wrights and their shop mechanic Charlie Taylor built the first block aluminum engine in human history. Got 12 horsepower and weighed 180 pounds. And then the missing piece was the most complicated thing they'd ever saw. It was the propeller. Everyone thought he could take a boat propeller out of the water and it worked just fine. The Wright brothers' homemade wind tunnel realized that propellers are wings. But instead of these wings making us go up, these wings will push us. The Wright brothers carved their propellers by hand out of blocks of spruce. Got them up to 82% efficiency, carved them by hand. Which I know is just a number. But you'll understand that number better when I tell you that today using computers, we cannot get those propellers past 87%. 5% more efficiency using a computer than two guys did carving them by hand in the bicycle shop. Pretty sure we shouldn't be able to fly still today. But now that you guys look hot out here in a nice cold day, I'm going to take you back in time to a real cold day. December 17th, 1903. When Wilbur and Orville Wright walked out of that building right there, it was 6 degrees outside where you were standing. The wind was howling from the northeast, anywhere from 21 to 30 miles an hour. They didn't want to fly that day at all, but it always promised their father, the bishop, they'd be home in time for Christmas every single year. So Wilbur climbed on the roof of this building right here, and he hammered in a big red blanket. That was a signal to the Coast Guard station across the sand over there to walk over and give them a little bit of help. So 3 guys came over that cold morning. 2 other witnesses were passing by. One of them was 16 years old, skipping school on a Thursday. And the Wright brothers and those 5 gentlemen opened up this hangar door, started dragging their 605-pound flying machine towards the west. We're going to leave this spot and follow them over to that boulder for the last 10 minutes of this talk. As we walk over to that boulder, I want you to imagine you're a witness that day. You're a human being. But every one of you have been told since the beginning of time, what you are out here to witness is impossible unless somebody was born with a set of these. So why would any of you be out here volunteering your time, not getting paid a cent? Some of you might not. But I bet you there's a handful of you out here that desperately hope somebody figures out something impossible today before you go to bed tonight. Let's all walk over this little boulder, see if we can watch some history.